My conversation today is with Uve Poom. He's the head of operations at Tenity Tallinn, working closely with Estonia's startup ecosystem. Estonia is a small country, 1.3 million people. Most don't think about it on a daily basis. It's not the Roman Empire, but it sits at one of the world's geopolitical hotspots. It borders Russia. And I want to understand Estonia. What makes it relevant globally? What's brewing in its tech and startup scene? I think Estonia punches above its weight. And as often in these types of online conversations, sound quality is unpredictable. But I hope you'll listen and I hope you'll enjoy. Do you do any trading with the whole thing happening with AI and things on the markets now? It's interesting times.
Yes, I mean, the answer in a way is yes, and then I refrain from doing much, at least as far as stock picking goes, because I don't know how to.
Very few people do, right?
Yeah, exactly. I just met with a friend who does it for a living as a day trader, and he's also like not getting any richer.
Yeah, every time I've been putting my hands on my assets, I've been losing money. So I'm just staying out of it.
Yeah.
But what do you think is going to happen now with the tariffs that Trump is putting on the whole world? Like it seems like a recipe for disaster. I don't know. You're not maybe an expert on this topic, but
I do keep an eye on it, and the way I understand it is that supply chains these days are so cross-border that having tariffs hurts American manufacturers, and there is no guarantee that the supply chains will be reworked quickly enough to have American-made components to substitute the foreign ones.
makes sense.
And maybe it could happen, but if we're talking like electronic components, they require tens and hundreds of millions in capital expenditures, and like that type of economic policy adjustment takes ages.
Yeah. Does Estonia produce a lot of things with global impact other than software, like hardware related things?
I mean, there's an Ericsson manufacturing here
Okay.
that is a big exporter. Ericsson was supposed to build another one, but that was actually dropped. It's a good question why. Maybe they anticipated the tariffs, or they just decided to put it on hold for a while. Maybe they're worried about geopolitics and security. But I mean, there's that electronics and some maybe, let's say, wood products.
Yeah, lumber. But so Ericsson, I mean, that's a Swedish company. Doesn't that count as a Swedish? Can you take credit for that?
No, I mean, let's say in terms of export numbers, it inevitably accounts for Estonian exports.
Okay, well, that's fair. That's all that matters, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if the question is asked that way.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, you work a lot with the startup scene, right?
Title-wise, head of operations at Tenity Tallinn. So what I do for a living includes running an accelerator program for startups.
Cool.
And well, there, you advise startups, you find coaches, mentors, consultants for the startups. I would introduce them to people in our, let's say, mentor community or business network, with the idea of helping them validate their solutions, and then when they're more mature, to find partnerships or POCs. So there's a lot going on in that area.
Do you do this only? Is this only Estonia, or is it worldwide, or is it international in some way?
So as an organization, Tenity does it in Europe and Asia. So there are 6 hubs altogether, and the programs are run in some 20 or so countries. So we can organize events in other countries as well. And then I personally, at Tenity Tallinn, we cover the Nordic and the Baltic region, and a little bit of Central Eastern Europe as well. So the idea is to attract startups to join the program. They get funded. It's a VC-backed acceleration program, and then if all goes well, then we fund them a little bit more.
Cool. So you said Asia. Did you invest in DeepSeek?
We probably missed that. Also, it's out of our mandate, so we invest in financial services related to startups.
Okay. All right.
So AI is a little out of scope. But we have a hub in Singapore, so that's what gives us our Asia coverage.
Have you been to Singapore much, or have you traveled?
Personally,
I heard it's nice. I heard it's
yes.
like
So they
very
say,
green, and they have great food and stuff.
yeah. And I mean, Estonia and Singapore are often, in a way, lumped together. So when it comes to digitalization and e-governance and digital societies, then Singapore and Estonia are both kind of compared and contrasted because, we are small countries, therefore arguably easier to manage than bigger countries. And of course, the governance styles are very different. So in that respect, maybe not so easy to compare it also. Like geographic location, what makes the economies tick in either country, that's quite separate as well. But as far as digitalization of state services goes, that's the benchmark.
I mean, that's one of the things that people really like talking about when they talk about Estonia, like the digitalization of state services. I've been looking at starting a company in Estonia. I haven't, but I mean, it's always up there on the list because people say, look into it. They have this digitalization. It's very, you can do it remotely and so on. Is it actually true that you are, or are you still ahead of other countries, or are other countries catching up?
So I think to a degree, the early start Estonia took in terms of this e-residency program where non-residents of Estonia can apply for the Estonian electronic ID and then start accessing both public and private services that way. So everything from business registries to banks and whatever else you need. So there's a head start. But in a way, it gives us the head start is that e-residency as a product is actually incredibly complex because you in a way think about it like, okay, there's a digital ID for foreigners.
Yeah.
As long as you can authenticate a person, maybe at an embassy, maybe with an honorary consul, or these special pickup locations that they set up on a kind of a pop-up basis, then that could be easy. But actually, in order to facilitate an easy or good user experience for someone like you who is considering setting up a company somewhere outside of their native jurisdiction, then you have to involve different ministries from like the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of the Interior, Police and Border Guard Board. So all these stakeholders, they have a say in the matter, whether it's around legislation, whether it's around security concerns to make sure that fraudsters don't get access to e-residency, and therefore the LLC that you would be setting up. So it's there, but it's not as if other countries aren't trying to have theirs set up. So the race is on.
What was the reason that Estonia decided to go for something like this? Because it sounds like it's just opening the door to a lot of very uncomfortable situations with, I don't know, double taxation and so on.
I mean, if you look at the origin story, and this is something that I looked into and asked, let's say, the founders of the program or the conceptual fathers and mothers. So it was a particular state official working, I believe, at the Ministry of Economic Affairs at the time. And she approached the undersecretary of the state for, let's say, digitalization, or we lovingly call this role the Chief Information Officer of Estonia.
Oh, that's good. It's modern, title-wise as well.
Yes. So it doesn't sound quite as bureaucratic. And then one of the arguments was that Estonia, we already had our smart card as the electronic identification card that was set up now, I think 22 years ago. So Estonians have gotten used to it. And then every now and then you had foreign investors who were looking to invest in Estonia, whether it was a startup or a more traditional business, doesn't matter. And when the foreigners had to get together, I don't know, maybe you have like half a dozen shareholders, then they had to revert or resort to this old paper-based signing procedure. And all the Estonians were like, but we can do this online, like we don't need to bother. And then all the foreigners were like, sorry, we don't have access to this lovely smart card that you kids have. And then, if you scale it a little bit more, then you can easily have agreements where you have a dozen or 24 counterparties who need to sign it. And that was, in a way, the initial problem that was being solved, that let's allow foreigners to, sign whatever corporate actions you need. But then by the same token, we have had a lot of Finnish entrepreneurs operating in Estonia for a long time, Swedish entrepreneurs for that matter. And then, you can the list is much longer. But whoever was a foreign investor, they didn't have access to it, and that seemed a bit absurd.
Mm.
So then that was maybe the interest, but then as time passed, then the idea acquired a life of its own, and it really became, on the one hand, a question of supporting entrepreneurs in terms of reducing the administrative hassle they have with setting up a business and running it.
Makes sense.
And then, of course, for the Estonian state, there was also this question of like, can we attract new taxpayers to the country or new jobs? And you mentioned this, double taxation and all that. So, I mean, in no way is the e-residency program and setting up an Estonian legal entity a means to tax evasion. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but that is not the kind of advice that is given to the.
It was not the purpose of setting it up.
Exactly. So, I mean, that rules of taxation in that way are really quite clear. You have your tax residency, you pay these taxes there. You have your corporate taxes; they're supposed to be paid in another country. Estonia has very favorable corporate tax rules, and in that respect, there is a tax advantage to setting up an Estonian legal entity, but it doesn't relieve you of the tax duties you have to your, let's say, country of residence.
What countries do you actually think are the biggest investors in Estonia?
Off the top of my head, I mean, it's definitely Finland and Sweden that are at the top and have been for, I think, since the 90s, basically. Mm. And then you have occasional, large investments that come in from the States. There's a large rare earth metals factory or like processing facility in the east of Estonia. It's built on this kind of old Soviet era processing facility, but then that was privatized, and then a Canadian group has bought that up, and that's quite precious, kind of intended. So in terms of these rare earth metals, there are not too many such factories or processing facilities outside of China who can make these available. So that company, in a way,
that's
is
unique.
Of strategic interest.
Yeah. What kind of minerals do you know? Which ones you have in Estonia that very few other, or is it the processing of them?
It's processing. It's more like you would have to buy them, or maybe there is a returned computer, any electronic, and then you need to harvest that, and clean it and sell it to the next user. So it's not the local stuff.
Oh, okay. Do you I would have expected, at least historically, maybe not today, that there would have been a lot of Russian investment into Estonia, but maybe that's not the case.
Not for a long time. I think for security reasons, I mean, Estonia has been aware of the Russian risk for ages. And then in that respect, of course, certain Russian capital has found its way to Estonia and continues to operate here to this day, especially, let's say, in real estate and the ownership of land. But in terms of having, I don't know, banking, that would be Russian controlled. That was weeded out or prohibited a long time ago. And many other types of, let's say, industrial production as well. There used to be, up until not even now, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but a lot of transit business. I mean, geographically, we are still neighbors, and logistically, transit makes a lot of sense. And that industry had a lot of Russian citizens working in the field. And then on the Estonian side, a lot of the entrepreneurs would be Russian-speaking Estonian citizens and residents involved in that. And again, it's still there because geography hasn't changed, but there are a lot of direct and indirect sanctions in place. So the importance of this transit industry has diminished tremendously over the past decades.
That makes sense. Well, what do you think today are, if we think with the financial hat on, what are the things that put Estonia on the map?
I mean, software is the one industry that really stands out, and there are a few ways to go about it. So, story-wise, you have now the story of Skype, which is already a little bit old, but the general idea is that Skype's R&D center was set up in Estonia back when it was founded by these Estonian engineers and the Swedish and Danish entrepreneurs. That laid the foundation or planted the seeds for this massive startup boom, and we're benefiting from it to this day. So, if I'm not mistaken, around 10% of the Estonian GDP is related to the software industry.
10%. But that's still
Yeah,
90% that is other stuff.
that
But
is true.
is it
Yes, but
norm?
it's a very high share.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Because I don't know, like, what in a normal country, how much of GDP would the largest industry be? Maybe 10% is actually exceptionally large for a single industry.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
the general idea, that
Mhm.
it's a high share, and I mean it's now expressed in Estonia. We have 1.3 million people, so it's not a massive country, but there are a couple of thousand software startups, including like 10 or so unicorns, depending on how you count them exactly. And of course, like that's just the tip of the iceberg. So there's much more going on underneath.
Yeah. Okay.
And IT is also helpful in that the salaries are high. So it's a driver in terms of purchasing power. You have the occasional exit, which in turn kind of pumps quite a bit of money when these exits happen. So right now we're anticipating the exit of Bolt that will mean quite a few millionaires in the small town of Tallinn. So there are the kind of the big parts, and then there's just a lot of low key tech industry as well. And then if you think about other important fields, we already touched upon timber. So timber exports, and the industry is not doing well right now, and there is a question of how much we overharvest our own forests. And the general consensus outside of the industry is that it's far too much. Inside the industry, they find creative interpretations for what counts for kind of forest land and what doesn't. So it's been overexploited for sure.
Like,
But
there's one tree on this field. It's clearly a forest.
exactly, and we need this one tree for seeding. So we've done the right thing. It's going to
Yeah.
naturally regrow. Fantastic.
Okay, 200 years. Yeah.
Yes, there's that. And then what's interesting is like if you ask like what's the less visible part of the Estonian economy, then it's actually quite hard to put your finger on one big thing. Like we stopped being an outsourcing destination a long time ago,
Yeah.
like 5 to 10 years ago. I mean, of course, there is still manufacturing and outsourcing here, but it's typically something that requires high qualifications from whoever makes stuff. So in other words, the kind of labor cost advantage has disappeared.
Mm.
So yeah,
What was it like when you were, if we talk about labor cost advantage and this change, when you were like a kid growing up, what kind of work prospects did you see in life as a guiding star to living a good life? Because I imagine it's very different what kids growing up today see as, a good life compared to what you saw.
I mean, this is an interesting question because I think I represent a generation who started to get exposure to opportunities in tech, and these are quite, let's say, life changing. So the narrative for people around my age, and especially those that are a bit older. So I'm 40 for the record.
I think, you look 25 max.
Yes, I have my elixirs, but if you look at older people, then a lot of my friends and let's say my maybe elder siblings friends, they located abroad for not just economic reasons but also professional reasons. So you wanted to go study abroad, you wanted to position yourself to get a job abroad, because businesses in Estonia were like, they were small, they were local, and it wasn't exciting as far as professional opportunities go. Now again, let's get back to Skype, but also why it's formerly known as TransferWise, and then Pipedrive, and then Bolt, and then the many other international tech companies. They started to represent international job opportunities right at home, and they went with the salaries to go with it, right? I mean, you're not making London money, but also you're not spending London money. So if you like the scenery, you like being close to friends and family, and Estonians typically have quite kind of strong local roots. We love our cottages in the countryside and going there in the summer, and it's typically not the average Estonian's dream to leave the country. And even those who have left, they very typically come back to Estonia for the summer, or at least several weeks in the summer, to get the best of the white nights and the warmth of July and the festivals. So there's a kind of a healthy dose of wanting to be in Estonia.
It's one of my great life tragedies that I've never been to Estonia.
We'll have to fix that, obviously.
Well, yeah, it's sad.
Yeah. And again, best enjoyed in the summer. There are other occasions when it's nice as well. We've got this lovely Christmas market, and that's also a popular time for a lot of people to come visit Estonia.
I've heard that it's just before you continue. I have heard that prices have been going up a lot, and I've even been reading articles from people who are like, "Don't move to Estonia. Like it's too expensive to live there now compared to what you're earning."
In general, I completely agree. And there's like, if you're not in tech, then coming to Estonia is a fool's errand. If you're in tech, then you have kind of a better, life quality or more purchasing power. But there are serious questions on like where you have more purchasing power. If it's, for example, in Lithuania, the purchasing power of the average person is higher. The wages are not as high, but the prices are relatively lower than that. As an Estonian, if go travel abroad, you can go to Scandinavian capitals, and the prices, interestingly, are quite comparable, which
Really?
you wouldn't expect. But
No.
if you go get a cup of coffee, then you can easily pay the same rates in central Tallinn and in central Oslo.
So yeah, and how many percent of the population works in IT?
I don't know off the top of my head.
That's fair. Let me look it up. Maybe we can ask
Yeah.
ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Because then that means there's a lot of people who, like, I would imagine a majority of the population are really struggling to make ends meet.
I would say that this purchasing power has decreased notably over the last 2 years in particular. And with COVID, it was a little bit masked, right? Because your average spend was down. You couldn't go out much. So then people were saving, and then that built up savings. Then when COVID blew over, then there was a kind of massive party, consumer festival.
Yeah.
And coupled with a few other kind of economic developments, inflation shot up. So Estonia, about 2 years ago, the inflation rate somewhere were literally like 20-25%.
Wow. I Googled it. 5% work in IT. 40,000 people, something like that.
Yeah. And a lot of them kind of live in Tallinn or Tartu, right? So it's kind of concentrated. Even though you have young people who work in IT and they live maybe in the countryside somewhere, it's possible, but that's not the majority of IT.
I interrupted you. You were talking about how these new startups, the tech companies, were becoming a kind of a new employment possibility, career possibility at home.
Yes.
How did that go?
So, I mean, it went well, right? So there are now, as you said, 40,000 people working in tech, and these are very, interesting opportunities. They can be very well compensated. If you get onto one of the stock option bandwagons, then it can be life changing in that respect. Yeah, anybody who is content with opportunities like that and wants to be in Estonia, they are. And with COVID, lots of people came back. So again, in my, let's say, peer group, age group, there were people in their 30s, give or take. And when they were stranded somewhere abroad when COVID struck, they were, what am I doing?
This is not home.
No, it's not home. I don't have any of my loved ones here. I mean, if you had already, nested with someone, that's a different story.
Sure.
But if you were living the kind of, yuppie, white collar, urban life, then you had very little reason to stay there. And then people found their way back, and maybe they held on to their jobs there, but maybe they actually decided that no, I'm going to try and get a job. Either it wasn't possible to stick to the old one, or you wanted something that is local and socially more rewarding than working remote.
I mean, I can recognize that in myself as well. When I lived in Seattle, I really missed having, being close to my roots. I wanted to feel like my life was kind of building onwards from what was done previous generations in some way. It sounds stupid maybe, but there was some weird significance in actually being where my parents were and where their parents were. And I don't know if there's a good word to describe this. But maybe, did you feel this as well? Because you've been living abroad and you came home at some point.
Yeah, I mean, actually, in that respect, everything I've been saying, I embody that bachelor degree as well. So, I mean, personally, the idea was very simple. When I returned home after, we worked together in Kiev, and then that was in turn after I had been to the US and to France for studies. Then I was thinking like, okay, what do I want to do with not with my life, but rather with my, let's say, 40s. To have parents who are aging, spending time with them makes a whole lot of sense. And being abroad, also like not only are you far away, but then all your vacation also ends up being spent on going home rather than going exploring other places. So there's a kind of an opportunity cost there. Again, it's payable if the stakes are right, but for me it was kind of
No, that
interesting
makes sense.
to be here. Yeah. And then back at the time, I was also building my own startup. So the team was in Estonia, and then it made the most sense to be close, because for an early stage company, the face-to-face communication gives you a certain advantage. And this was also pre-COVID, so remote work wasn't quite as second nature as it is today. And then let's not forget about friends. Like I had curated a list of friends since birth who were all here, and that's something that is very difficult to replicate in another.
Is it the same in
Yes.
Estonia as in Sweden, where the only way to really make native friends is to have them since childhood?
To a degree, right? I mean, I think it's like basic human psychology, but there is a question of like, if Estonians see you as somebody who is likely going to move on, and physically speaking, relocate elsewhere, then there's obviously little reason to invest in a relationship, or the time and so forth. The other dimension, obviously, is like, do you click with the transplant living in Estonia? So I have a few transplant friends, and we're friends because we share some, values, interests.
What is a transplant? Sorry, I don't know this.
Whether you want to call it an expat or an immigrant is a good catch-all neutral case for a transplant. So it's absolutely possible, and I've seen a few foreigners, build their homes in Estonia quite successfully. But typically, it involves a local spouse or partner, and then family. But once you're local, and once you are a reasonable human being who kind of can relate to Estonians, then
I know that in Sweden, people are being pushed to learn Swedish when they move to Sweden. I mean, it's not a necessity if you want to become a citizen, which is maybe a disconnect, but they're being pushed to learn Swedish. But the truth is that the level of Swedish you can learn in a short time, like rudimentary Swedish, it's actually not very useful. It's actually then much more useful to speak English with almost everybody. But then when you get to a certain level of almost not native level, but you can have complex conversations, it actually opens up a lot of doors. Is it the same in Estonia?
So I would say that the problem statement is word for word the same. The foreigners, maybe I should correct it, they're not pushed to learn it. Of course, a lot of people expect that to kind of do if you're here for the long run. But everybody also understands that Estonian is a very complex and hard language to learn. So in that respect, there is kind of a sober understanding that if you don't get Estonian to kind of a proficient level, then that's fine. It's good enough if you get by in a coffee shop and maybe read a newspaper occasionally. Even that doesn't matter. So the doors, I think, work in a way where, again, if you're a foreigner in tech, you're fine.
Okay, it's special rules if you're a foreigner in tech.
Yes, I mean, then you have the right professional opportunities, and you have the social circles that you align with, or that work for you. I mean, you can then branch out. If you find a few artsy, creative friends, and maybe a few civil servants, and in general, like anybody who has Estonians who have lived abroad and then they come back, then that has changed the perception, and they're very happy to have foreigner friends back home as well. Respect is a kind of a loose bubble, I would say. But then if you want to work in a more traditional business, let alone civil service, then not knowing Estonian becomes...
Wait, the connection is a bit shaky from you. It's laggy. Can you repeat what you said from, but if you want to?
But if you want to work in a kind of more traditional company or the civil service, then knowing Estonian is almost mandatory.
So you said that I just want to kind of share my screen here quickly. I want to look at this family tree of languages that I'm sure many have seen before. I just wanted to look at where Estonian is, and maybe that will help us understand why it's difficult.
I mean, I've seen this map as well, but now I can't quickly spot where Estonian
I found
lands here.
Finnish. Is it close to Finnish? It's down there.
Yeah,
on the
exactly.
right
It's
side.
there. Yeah, I mean, it's right. It should be right next to Finnish and Hungarian. Has this
Okay.
insensitively been? Okay, that's a better image.
Here
Can
we
you
go.
zoom into the tree there?
Yeah, here we go. It's out on the branch with Finnish.
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, unless you come from a background of speaking Sami or yeah, one of these other ones, it's difficult, right? It's a whole new logic of learning a language.
Quite.
Yeah. Jeez.
Vocabulary-wise, it's not so hard because Estonia has been at this kind of intersection or crossroads of many countries, trade routes. Then if you think about our recorded history, let's say, then there's been the Danish occupational rule, the Swedish rule.
Wait, the Danish occupied you as well?
Yeah, 1200s they landed in the north of Estonia and conquered the northern bit, while
What?
some German religious orders they were taking the south, like kind of coming from Latvia, and then they met halfway through Estonia and then shared the territory accordingly.
I'm like, why did they go all the way over there? That seems like they have lower hanging fruit if they need to conquer somewhere. Just bringing up the map here, I googled this. I guess it's this one. Like
Yeah,
they felt
probably,
the
yeah.
need to go all the way up there for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you the story of why that happens.
Tell me, why
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Okay, so this is a good history lesson. Okay, once upon a time there were the Holy Land Crusades, right, to Israel's territories.
Yeah, yeah,
These failed.
yeah.
Then there were these, let's say, Teutonic Knights, and then some, but let's call them the Teutonics. These chivalrous people, they were unemployed, they were militant,
Oh, no.
and that is a bad combination.
Yeah.
So they were actually, a social problem because they robbed people on the roadsides and were kind of belligerent in the local tavern and got drunk, and nobody liked these knights at the time. Then let's again use the Teutonic Order as the catch-all phrase here. Them and the King of Denmark, they went to the Pope and said that, behold, there are these pagan people in the territories of Estonia and Latvia. Not only that, there are also trade routes because Russian-European trade was increasingly flowing through the waterways in the region. And then the Danes, they also evidently had to chop down all the trees for their shipbuilding from Denmark, and they needed more. So there were also trees, timber.
You
goes
had trees in
back a long
Estonia.
way.
Yeah.
Yes, lots of oak. Oak is our national tree. So then the Pope kind of kindly signed off on the crusades to go christen the fine people in the territories of present-day Latvia and Estonia. Lithuanians kind of come in there in part to a degree as well, but they have their separate kind of religious history. So this is how the Danes and the Germans landed in Estonia in the 1200s.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So you've been at the crossroads of many nations. Like a lot of people have been to your land.
Even for a short time in the south of the country.
Growing up, I heard there was this really stupid story told in school. I mean, maybe not when I was that young, but that, yeah, Estonia, the Swedish Empire once stretched to Estonia, but they always said that we were the best empire to conquer them. Isn't that ridiculous? Or do you think it's true? Is it actually true?
I mean, this is a very amusing part of the historical discourse that we constantly, at times kind of acknowledge at face value. They're called the good old Swedish times. But then
Really?
if you apply a little bit of critical thought, then, I mean, the bar was really low. So still serfdom and occupation and exploitation and whatnot. But I mean, why the argument is valid is that during the Swedish time, the Estonian education system got its groundwork laid.
Mm.
And there was a certain scholar called Forselius. He was evidently a friend of the Swedish king, and he had this kind of quite enlightened ideas, even though it was well before the Enlightenment. Farmers and peasants having to kind of be able to read, not necessarily write. Maybe writing is well for good measure, but reading was more substantial. So then he's got the king to sponsor or permit the building of village schools all over the country, so that
Oh,
people had the right to get 4 years of education, not the obligation to get it, but they had the right to get it. And that means that already in the 17th century, a good chunk of Estonians became literate.
okay. And that in turn created Bolt and Skype and all of
Yes,
these. Yeah, that's a chain of events.
yes.
Beautiful.
But
No, but
also, oldest high school in Estonia is called Gustav Adolf Gymnasium. So it was
oh,
founded by one of the many Gustav Adolfs. And the same Gustav Adolf founded the University of Tartu a year later. So this is in the 1630s.
mm, okay. And I mean, geopolitics continues to be a hot topic for Estonia, as I understand. I also read that Estonia will now aim to spend 5% of GDP on military. Well, how has kind of has it changed the mindset of Estonians or people in your vicinity, society, since you were a bit younger, or maybe just in the past few years since the invasion of Ukraine started?
So, okay, so as I said earlier, Estonians never really had their guard down when it comes to Russia. And there were maybe hopes about Russia becoming democratic in the 90s, but then soon after Putin took over, then that was a kind of a lost cause. When Georgia happened in 2008, then Crimea, the Euromaidan 2013, right? These
Yeah.
were all pretty red flags by our standards.
Yeah.
And the intelligence community, the diplomatic corps, they have always been warning our European and North American and Western allies as to the nature of the threat. You know, there was the same applies for Latvia, Lithuania, for that matter. So the Baltics, they were often perceived as paranoid at the time. I told you so. It's far too bittersweet
Yeah.
to be appreciated. Uh, Estonia was meeting the 2% NATO defense spend obligation well before the wars. In that respect, we've always put our money where our mouth is. We have conscription, so in that respect, everybody needs to serve. All men, 8 or 11 months, depending on what kind of
Okay.
program you end up in. And then we have a very robust territorial defense organization that is a volunteer organization, but a lot of the conscripts, once they're done, they join the national. It's not called the National Guard; it's called the Defense League, but it's the National Guard equivalent. If you think about it in American terms.
Okay.
So there are exercises or drills periodically. They are quite popular. I mean, some people find it a nuisance, but many other people are. Yeah, I mean, of course I go. It might be a bit tedious. You need to take 2 weeks off of work and your family obligations, but you go.
Yeah. And it's a way to kind of reconnect with old friends, I guess, as well, right? I
Yeah,
guess
I
you.
mean, it's absolutely a community. Maybe saying it's a hobby is selling it a bit short or
Yeah.
misrepresenting what it is, but there is that component.
Yeah. But has this changed during your life? Is that something that rose up now, or has it always been like this for as long as you can remember?
I mean, with every hostile step that Russia has taken, the voluntary efforts have also increased.
Mm.
So after the Ukraine invasion in 22, then there was like massive increase in the number of applications that the Defense League got.
Mm. I was talking to our mutual friend Andreas the other day, and I said that for Sweden, like if somebody wants to invade Sweden, indications were that a lot of people would not be ready to take up arms and defend the country. Like that's how I've felt the general vibe has been for the
Mhm.
past years. His point was that when it actually happens, it would happen, it would probably be different, and there would be a sense of urgency, people would actually be there in the end anyway. What do you think kind of the willingness to defend Estonia is like right now in the country?
It's fairly high. It's a mixed bag, right? I don't want to say that everybody's going to be up in arms, but
Sure.
but I would say that Estonia will be able to put up a fight for its size.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's even like I have equally high expectations of the Finnish. I think they would also give any invader hell.
Yeah, and I mean the Finns are far better equipped than the Estonians are.
Oh, they are. Okay. Yeah, I'm not aware of the differences, but is this
It comes kind of the strength of the artillery force, which, as we see these days, is very important. And the Finns, they're really armed to teeth, and they have their own ammo production, and now they're setting up a 200 million TNT production facility. So that alone is quite a bit, and then they can also mobilize about 500,000 people when it's necessary.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. Is the topic of national defense, NATO, Russia, I don't know how to delimit the conversation, but is it a topic of national debate, or are people pretty much aligned? Is this a major political topic right now?
People are aligned. I mean, there is no discussion there's always discussion on whether it should be 2 or 3 or 5. I mean, it's hard to argue with the 5 as well. So in that respect, I can't really say that that is the sticking point. Maybe it is in more subtle ways because there are many people whose incomes have been relatively decreasing, or the purchasing power thing that we discussed earlier on. So in that respect, there's also but healthcare, and the healthcare totally needs more resources. I mean, as it goes. So in that respect, I'm not saying that it's easy, but overall, I mean, the tax increases that have been passed now and they're taking effect this year, they were at the end of the day accepted because everybody understands the argument.
I was looking at this historical map of how people have been voting in Estonia. And this is coming from somebody who doesn't know the parties at all. I don't know any of the parties, what they stand for. I think I can get some kind of overview by looking at which European group they are a member of. But just as a side note, I'll edit this out. Are you comfortable just giving an intro of this and roughly
sure.
what the parties are?
Yeah, I mean, granted that I need to make out the graph myself, right?
But I'll put it here at the very end. We can look at the past 1 year, for an example, to make it less messy.
Actually, let's not. It's a bit skewed. Let's look at maybe 2 years. Can we see the elections?
2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years is best. Yes.
Yep.
Good.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to pull up the political history, the voting history of people in Estonia. Obviously, I'm an idiot. I don't know anything about Estonian politics, but it seems that if parties are relatively aligned, you mentioned some other political topics that people are arguing. How are the election results, do you think, correlating with the issues that people have in society right now?
So if you look at this chart, then the blue Isamaa kind of clearly dominates the polls these days, and they are in opposition. So they have a great time. Times are tough, and times are tough. Economically speaking, the economy has been kind of muddling through over the past 2-3 years. And it's very easy for an opposition party to say, XYZ about not increasing taxes or having a vision for saving the Estonian economy is easy. Then if you ask for the actual vision, then it's a little bit hollow. But, it's they get a lot of the protest votes, even though it's not a new party. I mean, it's been around the landscape since but my explanation as to why they are so popular post-elections is simply because they're in the opposition and they don't need to carry the responsibility of governance.
Yeah, because if we look at the last vote in 2023, they lost. They were one of the smaller parties, and this party Reform won. But
Yes.
then they've just been going downhill. Could you just very quickly take us through the parties and their general ideas?
Yeah, so Isamaa is a conservative party, central conservative. They've been, over the years, they've also, these days, I think they've become more conservative, at least at face value, because of populism and, Trump and all the far-right success stories in Europe. So they try to emulate that a bit. EKRE, who at the elections got 16%, they are the far-right party of Estonia, very kind of belligerent rhetoric, always being the no party, not being constructive really ever. They made it into the government for a while as well, so they kind of had to sober up. But they, at the end of the day, they used the same Brexit, Trump, whatnot playbook. But they imploded last year. So it was kind of father-son led, and a lot of the well-educated conservatives who are really conservative, but who are also they appreciate rule of law and good governance and polite discourse. They basically said, we're leaving because you guys won't just hijack the party to your family or as a run it as a family business.
I see that problem with a lot of countries where it's like relatives being involved in the same party. It's problematic one way or another.
So EKRE stopped being forced to be reckoned with, at least for the time being, last year.
Okay.
And in a way, it came out of nowhere. But again, they took the playbook or the populist playbook and did well. Then the Reform Party, they have the prime minister's position. If you know Kaja Kallas, the former prime minister of Estonia, who is now the foreign minister of the European Union, she belongs to the Reform Party. How should I say, Reform, they have lost, they're center-right, kind of pro-business, socially more on the liberal side. They also have like very generous social policies such as this parental leave policy in Estonia. Either of the parents can get up to 18 months their kind of salary compensated by the state after the child's birth. So it's very, very generous that way. Reform, while being kind of a liberal, socially speaking, pro-business party, they have also been the champions of that policy, which is tax-wise pretty expensive. But you get the idea that they're not kind of clean cut. And they've typically been kind of pro-defense. Isamaa has always been very pro-defense. So that maybe kind of explains part of Isamaa's popularity as well, but not only. It's not as if Reformierakond hasn't been. But they're in the government in a tough time, so it's difficult to maintain popularity.
Are there any other topics that are really hot potatoes right now?
In the, let's say, welfare, it's the economy, stupid. That is absolutely a running theme. And then there are, as I said, the healthcare industry, or industry, rather, the healthcare fund is in a tough spot.
Okay.
Because it's not sustainable given the obligations and revenues that we have, especially with the aging population. All of these standard arguments that most Western countries face. Pensions, very tricky business. The thing is that in Estonia, pensions are indexed to the consumer purchase index, and as a result, if inflation is high, they're outpacing the tax revenue. So they're becoming automatically a larger part of the state budget, and there is no control over the expense. And then, a lot of people, let's say economists, who look at it from a fiscal perspective, are going like, guys, we need to either like stop the indexing for a year or two, or then decouple it altogether, because otherwise our state budget will be chronically overburdened.
And this is so difficult with all the cost increases. Like these, we're talking about people who already have almost no money, and they're going to get even less.
Yes, or at least purchasing power wise, right? They will not get numerically less. And then the cost of that policy specifically, but also, I mean, if you look at the other areas where we're spending, defense requires its own fair share, right? Healthcare requires its own fair share. These are expenses that are quite hard to negotiate with. Teachers, policemen, firefighters, everybody's, financially kind of less well off than they were maybe 2-3 years ago. So it's impossible to balance, and as a result, then the Estonian state or public debt has been increasing. Estonia was really good with maintaining a balanced budget up until, I would say, COVID, maybe a little bit before, and then if it's not everybody who gets the haircut right now, then it's the future generations who are getting the haircut later.
That's a good way to put it. And do you hate the environment? Because I see only 1% of Estonians are polling for the Greens.
Given what we do with our trees, we might.
Yeah.
No, I mean, Greens are a little bit marginal as a political force. And there are parties, or let's say that there are politicians within all of the mainstream parties who are kind of environmentally minded, try and do the right thing.
Mm.
Which again, to a degree, is happening. Like we have this big topic about oil shale. We produce our power in part out of oil shale.
Okay.
We mine it in the east of the country, then we burn it. Ridiculous CO2 emissions, worse than coal. And then we are basically, for every ton we emit, we need to pay the CO2 tax, so to speak, or the carbon credits. We need to purchase those. So it's economically quite unviable. And then there was a policy, or there is a policy that, by, I can't remember which year, let's say, 2040 or so, we need to decouple our power production from oil shale because it's far too polluting.
Mm.
But then what do you substitute it with? Like Russian
good
gas
question.
is not a popular answer. Renewables have their well-known shortcomings. Nuclear, very expensive for a small country to have on its own, unless some small reactors are becoming viable, which we're really actually counting on in a way. And leaning on, let's say, Scandinavian produced nuclear or hydro power, that is a little bit untenable given what's been going on with the cables.
I was going to say, that works as long as the cables are there. But
yes.
Is this something people are talking a lot about in Estonia? Because I can imagine people will be a bit scared.
So, I mean, there's the awareness of what's going on, and the result of it is that now we need to keep investing in our oil shale production because that's autonomous, and I mean, the environment is paying the price, but the alternatives are a bit too bleak.
Yeah. It was 1 month ago now that
Yeah, roughly. Yeah. And there have been 3-4 incidents by now. There was one last year.
And is it internet cables as well? It's internet and power cables, right? That they've been cutting.
Yes, and I mean not only between Estonia and Finland, but there are other these, I think Sweden, Lithuania, if I'm not mistaken. There was at least power cable. Something in Latvia was damaged, I believe, last week. So yeah, it's a lot going on in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they're doing a little bit. Like I've seen that some ships now are very quickly taken under custody and taken away. I also feel like as a Swedish citizen that, I mean, maybe they need to be a bit more hard-handed on these issues. It feels like they don't have control, but what do I know?
I mean, so the discussion has obviously come up in Estonia now, and in part, it's quite hard to do anything about it because you don't police the sea, which is physically impossible, and you can kind of get on these vessels and check out what they're doing, but it's a little bit after the fact, right? So that's not going to be too helpful. So the questions are rather I've understood that between Estonia and Finland, it is possible to narrow the international shipping corridor, so it becomes kind of not untenable, but more complicated to use these routes. And if you congest it, then it will be less profitable. Okay. So it's kind of the deliberate congestion. It will also be easier to police.
Yeah, because you can have a ship going back and forth and looking, inspecting, making sure that they're not dropping their anchors and things like that.
Along these lines, yeah.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that Denmark evidently has a lot of power over this as well because of the Danish Straits. So they could, in theory, limit the types of vessels that are allowed to pass through. So all these shadow vessels that are problematic for other reasons to reduce, which, old, potentially kind of leaking vessels or something that will break very, very easily and pollute the sensitive Baltic Sea, just do not allow them in pretty much.
That's what I was thinking spontaneously when these things started to happen. It sounds like we need to just blockade a lot of what's coming in because we can't do that effectively. The question, of course, is what are the downstream effects of that? Who is going to complain and how will that happen?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask about the parties that you have talked about. You didn't get through all of them, but that's maybe not needed. Are there any of the currently fairly large parties, like let's say plus 10% that are leaning like maybe a little bit more Russian friendly than the other parties? Or are
No.
they all like very strongly?
No, yeah, I mean, my knee-jerk reaction was no, but then there is obviously the center party that is the obvious one that is, how should I put it? They're not exactly pro-Kremlin or anything like this, because that again is untenable as a position. You will be ridiculed and kind of marginalized. But Estonia has the size of the Russian-speaking population,
Right.
25-30% of the population. So the center party,
yeah,
25 to 30%. Yes. So the center party caters to them, not only to them, especially earlier on. They used to have quite a few Estonian voters, especially among pensioners. And, they're center left when it comes to their social and economic policies. But then, I mean, this requires a deep dive into the history of Estonian politics in the last 30 years. But long story short, this very charismatic leader they had, who was able to address both Estonian and Russian-speaking voters. He, at some point, retired and has since passed away. Then there was an Estonian-speaking leader of the party who took over, but he was less of an icon for the Russian speakers. But there were Russian-speaking politicians who were then like balancing that. And then now, in the last couple of years, actually, the Estonian wing of that party has diminished. Many have actually left the party as well, because they see that what's going on in the Russian-speaking wing of the party is not quite, let's say, not honest even, but not quite clear enough on what Estonian security is really all about. And I mean, these people there are populists who are appealing to the Russian-speaking vote. And when I say Russian-speaking vote, then that's mixed as well. I mean, not everybody is chauvinist, pro-Kremlin, or
of course,
there are very reasonable Russian-speaking people here. But the center party addresses, or they vote for the center party as well, because it's kind of, no, that's our party. They've been always advancing our rights and making sure that we're not screwed over in the country. So one way or another, they're here to stay and relax.
Do you think, I mean, it seems like it might be the case, but is there a big correlation between being Russian speaking and being more likely to align with Kremlin talking points?
Yes. I mean, if you're Estonian speaking, unless you're political freak, nobody is pro-Kremlin. Even people who had a lot of business in Russia or somehow were involved in this transit industry that I said, they have also said that what's going on in Ukraine is nothing you can really say apologetically about Russia after the full-scale invasion. Up until then, you had a few arguments that going like, Russia is a special country, they're a neighbor, they're economically mighty, we need to do business with them, let's be pragmatic. That pragmatism is kind of not exactly fashionable these days.
Are they mostly older people, the Russian speakers, and do they all speak Estonian as well, or are there some solely Russian speaking?
The Russian speaking population, so it's roughly 300,000 people, and you have all sorts of people in there. So there used to be like a segmentation into 5 groups. So on the one hand, you have the super well integrated bilingual people, went to Estonian schools, universities. So you can't make out if they're Estonian or Russian or what not. So I would have a lot of friends like that. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have typically older, let's say, imperial chauvinists. They think that this is all temporary, Russia will be back, and rightfully so. So you have them. They don't speak Estonian. And then now you have these shades of gray. So you have people who kind of speak Estonian, but don't feel that they belong into the society here.
Okay.
And that's in part because the Estonian identity is fairly kind of ethno-lingo-cultural. So speak Estonian, you're Estonian. If you don't speak Estonian, you can't be Estonian.
That's
whether
fair.
you have a citizenship or not, right? So it's a very continental European kind of approach. And then,
but if they speak Estonian and Russian, shouldn't they then be able to be a part of the Estonian cultural identity?
Well, they have multiple identities, right? They have the Russian identity as well, and they are kind of vying for priority. And then if you have these competing historical narratives, and your parents have been teaching you one thing, and then in school, and some out group is teaching you another thing, then it's not quite as clean cut. And it depends on the proficiency level as well. Like if you went to an Estonian school, it's one thing. If you went to Russian-speaking public schools, which we have plenty of here, then again, very different background or context that you are brought up with.
Yeah, I can imagine maybe it's a little bit like the Swedish-Finnish people. They grew up in Finland learning Swedish, and there's a group that speak mainly Swedish, right? Like in their daily life. And they are not Swedish, they're not completely Finnish, they're somewhere in between, and sometimes they're one and sometimes they're both. I guess it shifts.
Yeah, exactly. But then to continue on the segmentation, that there is also a significant group who don't necessarily speak much Estonian, but who feel quite at home. And they maybe don't identify necessarily on the kind of national level with politics and the social processes, but they have strong local identities, and they're very happy with their lives. And the thing is that a lot of these people live in the east of Estonia, and they have family and friends in Russia, so they go visit them, and then it's pretty sobering if you look at what's going on in Russia, and then in terms of like infrastructure, roads, pensions, purchasing power, and then you come to Estonia, and I mean, at the end of the day, one of the countries is in the European Union, and the other is Russia, so makes sense that you kind of are happy with where you are and you don't really want to mess with it too much.
Narva is supposed to be a quite Russian-speaking city, right?
Yes, like 90+%.
Do you think there's any stigmatization against people who speak Russian in Estonia today, especially after the invasion, the full-blown invasion?
I think a lot of Estonians kind of differentiate between, chauvinists and intelligent people who get the difference. So it's a very value-based judgment. Has Russophobia gone up? I guess so, but it's also like not exactly unfounded. It's like this paranoid person that is actually being chased by the government. Like, yeah, paranoid for a reason.
Yeah.
So but in general, I would say most people are able to kind of discriminate or differentiate between, like, you're a decent human being and we get along and you appreciate living in Estonia, then we're good. And then if you're not, then we have a problem. Now, we have a problem, by the way. I'm not saying that there is not a problem. We totally have it. And then a lot of Estonians are looking at the Russian-speaking community and going like, but why are you not opposing the invasion to Ukraine more loudly? You are really, let's say, whether it's loyal to the Estonian state or you like living in the European Union and whatnot. And there is not the response, but the analysis here is that for a lot of such Russian speakers, right, who in general appreciate living here and don't want to have anything to do with the war, they unfortunately have friends and relatives who don't have that opinion. So if you start to make your point, then you will actually alienate a lot of people. But it's hard to say what the distribution is. Who are mum because it's too expensive to speak up, and who are mum because they are pro-invasion, but they know that they can't say it.
And I imagine that for anyone on the outside, or let's just in there, but not a Russian speaker, if you hear somebody speak Russian, you don't know which part they're a member of. Like if they are the chauvinist, imperialist kind, or if they are the more Estonian kind, let's say. Do you think that
sharing European values? That's sort of what I like to say.
Yeah, sharing the European values. Do you listen a little bit carefully, or not you specifically, but do you think, listen a bit more carefully when they hear somebody speak Russian today? Like, and to evaluate, is this a friend or not a friend, kind of? Has the language become such an identifier, or do you think that's not the case?
No, not really.
No. That's
not
good.
Really.
That's good, because it's a pretty superficial factor, right? So it's good if you can kind of look beyond the language.
Yes. I'm just trying to think if you know, I've used it as a marker, or if I've heard somebody else do it. No, not really. Where you can be a little bit careful is that you have in the tech sector, you have a few Russians who have left Russia either since the full-scale invasion or even before, and they go to all the meetups and the conferences and whatnot. Then the question always is like, you know, if you come to these events, then obviously you want to kind of come across as really European, westernized, kind of hanging out with the cool kids. But then there's always the question that, you know, do you report to anyone? Or if the going gets really tough, then where do your loyalties stand exactly? And then what vulnerabilities you have back home? Because if you fled Russia, then maybe there is a relative back home that can be kind of triggered or pushed to manipulate you.
Do you have a lot of, I don't know the right denomination, but Russian expat slash politically they want to get out of the country, you know, they don't want to get drafted and so on, so they relocated to Estonia? Is that a significant group?
There are probably a few thousand like this. I mean, don't quote me on the numbers, but of course people came here as well. But I think a lot of them eventually moved on, because if you did come after the full-scale invasion, then again, if you're trying to integrate, especially with the Estonian-speaking population, there will be a lot of questions as to, you know, what's going on. And then if you can quickly and compellingly make your case that no, you really want to be in Estonia, this is great, and I'm kind of, you know, maybe I go back to Russia sometimes because the border is open, right? It's one of the few land crossings kind of in the European Union. You know, you go there, but it's because you have a grandmother there or some close relative that you need to visit. Fine. Oftentimes, you know, that discussion, I think a lot of the Russians who have fled, they don't even want to start this discussion, maybe because they're not quite as opposed to the war. They're more like fleeing mobilization. But that, you know, chauvinist identity kind of persists. And then they will go somewhere where there are people asking fewer questions.
I mean, a lot of them probably come to Portugal, where I live. I play board games every week, and there's one guy, he came and he was Russian. And during just playing, he would claim that, because we were playing a game, a board game it was a Russian game, like it was designed by a Russian game designer. And he made a point that for some reason or another, I don't remember, that Russia was the third Roman Empire. Like, really? He's like, yes, it is. Like, another funny story I have here is that I went back when I was on dating apps. I'm not currently because I'm in a relationship, but it relates to that time. I usually go to a coffee shop near where I live, and there's a Russian man. He's relocated quite recently, I think, here. And one time we started talking because we both had dogs, and you know, it was social. We saw each other a lot, and I started to kind of push him on the war question. Like, hey, if we're gonna keep meeting and socialize, I need to know that we are kind of aligned on this topic. And I wanted him to say something about, you know, Russia was wrong to invade Ukraine. I would have been happy with a statement similar to that, but he didn't do it. He refused. He the closest he came was like, I just want peace. I just want peace. And since that day, he became my nemesis. Fast forward maybe half a year, you know, I see him on the street a lot, and he's my nemesis. Keep that in mind. I look the other way demonstratively. But I matched with a girl on Tinder, and she writes, "Yeah, I got divorced quite recently. You know, my asshole ex-husband. You know, he lives in the same neighborhood. I'm like, I just know one other Russian guy in my neighborhood, and he's my nemesis." And then it was him. So that was just that was a fun coincidence.
Yes, validated asshole.
Yes, I was very satisfied. Anyway, I mean, Estonia, I feel, has a lot to offer. And not only Bolt and Skype. Nobody uses Skype anymore, right? Skype.
Well, I used it to learn Ukrainian with my Odessa-based teacher.
Okay.
Yeah. So it somehow, as far as the user experience goes, kind of makes most sense because it's easy to, you know, fire up, and then you have the person one click away, the phone call, or like 2 clicks away. When it comes to these meetings and calendar invites and all that, that's it's like having, a direct line to the White House. Skype gives you that experience, direct line to anyone who has the app open, obviously. So there is some residual efficiency in it. Other than that, Microsoft Teams evidently runs on the Skype engine.
Okay, it's the same engine. I didn't know that. That's a lot of residue. That's nice. My point was basically that I think that Estonia has a lot to offer today in the current startup landscape. You mentioned there is going to be an IPO maybe of Bolt soon. That's what people are expecting. Bolt, of course, being Estonian. And always my favorite, by the way. If I have the choice between Bolt and Uber or Glovo or one of the others, Glovo is fine. I don't mind Glovo. But I'd pick Bolt any day over Uber. It feels like it's a more European choice.
Yeah.
My question to follow up on this is, what do you think will happen in the future of Estonia? Like if we're looking at a situation today where you're struggling a little bit with cost of living, maybe, how do you see that developing? Is that going to impact the future tech industry of Estonia? Is something else going to sail up to become a major part of what makes Estonia important worldwide?
I mean, I've given this quite a bit of thought, and for the time being, I would say that again, when it comes to the economy, right, looking at how we'll manage and
Sure.
how we'll stay relevant and competitive, then I sense that tech is almost the only viable answer. Now, it can't only be software because AI is eating the world, and writing code and having a good talent base for that isn't quite the advantage that it used to be. Let's see how it really goes, but the general idea you get, right? So we need to go into the other fields. Estonia has a pretty interesting head start in molecular biology. That's because Estonia has a notable biobank, including 200,000 people who have given their genome samples to the biobank. And these have been processed. And last year they launched this kind of little portal where people like me who have donated their samples could then see the initial test results or analysis when it comes to like personalized medicine. So one of the things they gave me information on is whether I metabolize coffee well or not, and I do it as the average person does, and whether I metabolize it faster or slower than the average person does. And I personally, the speed of metabolization is as the average person.
Is this something like 20? That's really extreme digitalization of a country, I think.
Yeah, like Iceland and Estonia, I think, are the two countries that have these, high penetration rate of that. And that can be, in a way, commercialized as well. And I don't mean by way of the kind of selling people's medical data outright. There is a massive data leakage risk or vulnerability risk in the entire operation, and we're kind of very mindful of that. You can start running clinical trials based on information in the biobank rather than doing them in person. What value do these clinical trials provide if they're based on kind of 200, 300, 400,000 Estonian people? We're a very homogeneous society, so it doesn't give you the most reliable results. But there is value in that, and maybe we can just pioneer a lot of personalized medicine solutions or technologies that can then be exported.
True, and we do have a history, at least in the Nordics, of the medical industry. AstraZeneca in Sweden, we have Novo Nordisk now in Denmark. And do you think that's a possible? Are there any companies up and coming? Do you think are interesting in Estonia in that sense, or is it more of a broad idea you think might be something?
There are a couple of local pharma companies, more boutique ones, right?
Okay.
But I'm not an expert in the field, but I would venture to say that it's likely the boutique pharma companies that would be maybe coming up with personalized medicine drugs. It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that maybe we build the tech and then we sell it to whichever big pharma or player or insurance company. But yeah, if we then retain the funds from the innovation and are able to redeploy those in a sensible manner, I mean, that's kind of the Israeli model. So you build companies so that they would be sold and you don't really think about it twice. You kind of accrue most value in that phase of innovation. And then you could
Right.
have research centers of these, biotechs or large pharma groups located here. That's all pretty neat.
Wait, are we talking about American biolabs now?
Yes. Oh, they're along here. Yeah. All the pigeons flying around.
The pigeons. Wait. How do you bring the pigeons into it? Are they
They
armed
come
with?
from the biolabs, I think. And that's how you spread the fluids that are concocted.
Now I'm happy if they're in Estonia. I'm sure they're everywhere. My girlfriend was about to buy an apartment here in Lisbon, and it was packed with pigeons on the balcony. So
Mm-hmm.
now I'm happy that she didn't end up making an offer, because obviously
Yeah.
who wants to be next door to biolab pigeons?
I mean, it may have been the biolab itself that you will find.
Yeah.
You never know. They come in many shapes and sizes.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to wrap this up. I think it's been very nice talking to you, but I do want to ask a final question. What do you think people should pay attention to when it comes to Estonia moving forward over the next coming years? Like, is there anything we should be trying to read, look at, follow?
I mean, if somebody's actually keen on keeping abreast with Estonian news, then you go to news.err.de. It's our public broadcaster, and they have an English language website, so it gives you a digest of what's going on in the country. But other than that, what can I say? Professionally speaking, what I'm quite interested in is what we started out with in a way, whether Estonia can become not just kind of like, there's this, Estonia is the Silicon Valley of Europe, and then Stockholm says the same, and Copenhagen says the same.
Yeah.
But there is a question of whether Estonia can be the Delaware of the world. That's through the e-residency program, and that's been relevant for techies basically. But loads of people within the European Union have set up these companies, but increasingly, not even increasingly, but a lot of people from Ukraine, a lot of people from Turkey. Estonia could provide the infrastructure to efficiently run businesses. And as far as we can figure out the onboarding and the KYC or know your customer principles and making sure that we don't allow fraudsters in, then I think that could be a very interesting standard that the world needs. Like, Delaware is a legal standard with its court system for American companies. That's great. But there are countless small countries in the world who could benefit from a kind of a standardized jurisdiction that a lot of investors and entrepreneurs and customers appreciate. Estonia has, in a way, the opportunity to become such a jurisdiction.
Do you think anything particular needs to happen for that to happen? Like, does somebody need to do something for this to become reality?
So there is the question of making the user experience of acquiring the Estonian EID and then setting up and managing the legal entities a bit better. First of all, it has to go cardless. So right now you need a physical card, and that has to be picked up. And it's entirely possible to digitize these processes by having mobile phone-based application and ID. And then you also need to have very robust technology to fight against deep fakes. And that's the fraudster argument. So how do you verify and authenticate the persons behind the accounts? If you can do that remotely at scale and securely, then that's a massive win. And there is essentially a solution envisioned for it, but now it has to be built. And that takes a little bit of money and time.
Okay.
And the second thing is whether Estonia can kind of manage the entire process for everybody in English. Because as long as you need to keep some things, little things in Estonian here or there, then it's a bit moot. I mean, it's possible, but the UX is not as great.
Is Estonia one of the top English-speaking countries of the world?
I haven't checked the stats, but I mean, would say that proficiency of English is very high. It's a little bit generation dependent as well, but everybody who goes to school these days comes up and probably speaks it.
Yeah, I'm looking at just look at this map here. I don't know how accurate it is. We're just going to trust this random picture, I suppose. But 570 points, so it's ranked 23, just behind Luxembourg.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, good.
Yeah. I think it's a question of 10 to 20 years when the kind of generation shift happens, and then it's going to be right up there.
Yeah. Okay. Let's keep our eyes on this.
Yes.
And thank you, Uwe, for talking to me. Have a very good night.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Splendor of the Sun. It was nice to have you. Hope to see you again. This is a podcast about stories and histories, geography, wars, and mysteries. If you're interested in more and like the vibe, remember to hit like and subscribe. Sometimes truth is complicated. Like emotions, it can be unconsolidated. The sun in splendor is a symbol to maybe guide you. We could all use some knowledge to ride to. We have to burst the bubble and leave our chamber. The echoes grow stronger and put us in danger. So come back when you're ready for more. SOTS.